Hello, friends. We're back again. It's Fightful Overbooked. It's the weekend, so my shift has begun. I guess this is when I show up. It's
This is a good schedule for you, Joel Pearl. I want this schedule. Just work on the weekend.
I've slowly realized that like Thursday to Sunday seems to be like my working schedule here at Fightful, and I guess I'm okay with it. It's newsworthy. We talk about the news here through the week, so I get a good chance to catch up with Jeremy and talk about the news and all the stuff that you saw or didn't see across your news feed. Jeremy, how you doing this week?
I'm well. It's been a great morning, Joel Pearl. Great Friday. I guess it's Saturday now, but it's been a great morning. Love. I'm good. How are you?
Saturday mornings are always a treat. I watched my son, my little child, go to sleep in his crib just now, take a nap. He is currently sleeping with both legs outside of the crib, like through the slats, just dangling out there. And I'm just like, I hope he doesn't wake up or try to move, because that's going to wake his ass up. And I don't need that right now.
Well, best wishes to him and his nap time. I'm going to take a nap after this recording. So let's record so I can sleep, Joel, so I can be like Kenta and go to sleep.
Everyone should watch this video, leave a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and then go take a nap. You deserve it.
Yes. Yeah, you deserve your nap, you listening to this right now. You've worked hard this week, Monday through Friday. Go take a nap. Go take care of yourself, everybody.
Let us lull you to sleep.
I've been told I don't think this at all, but I've been told one person has told me this, and she married me for some reason, that I have a soothing enough voice to where they can just fall asleep. But I feel like that only happens if, you actually do really like that person. It's like, oh, that voice is so comforting. I don't feel like my voice is comforting for anybody else, because I scream and I have all these different levels to my voice, Joel.
Well, you scream when you... Wow, that was great for me.
That was not a soothing voice at all.
Sir, I don't know if you want this anymore, but for me, I mean, my voice usually stays a pretty even tone, but for you, yes, you do modulate. You emote. That's how you react in the time. That's fine. That's how we do it here. You got to do it. You got that. Yes, you're very eccentric. You got that voice for radio, not the face. It's okay. Your face is good for online. It's fine.
I do have a face for radio.
That's what I've been saying about myself for years. All these lucha masks behind me, they're just failed attempts at covering up. That's all it is. All right. Are you ready to go with number 5?
Let's get to it, Joel.
Let's get into it. Scissor me daddy ass. Anthony Bowens didn't ask for permission to scream it, and he talked about it on Allison Rosen is Your New Best Friend podcast. I am quickly becoming a fan of Allison Rosen. She is apparently quite friendly with RJ City, and I guess RJ is starting to, or has helped her have a few wrestlers on the show. I know Alexa Bliss has made an appearance. Now Anthony Bowens has shown up. Talk to me about Anthony Bowens' appearance on the Allison Rosen is Your New Best Friend podcast.
Well, Anthony Bowens, first off, is great. I'll listen to kind of any interview with Anthony Bowens. I find him very engaging when he speaks. He's got some good stories to tell. But I mainly want to put over Allison Rosen, because I discovered her podcast because RJ City was on it. I was like, oh, okay, I'll listen to this, see what happens. And yeah, since then, she's had more wrestlers on it. Dalton Castle was on it a couple months ago. And it's a really fun podcast. And now she does like this bit. She did it on this show with Bowens. She's like, I guess I'm like the number one wrestling journalist out there. Like all these wrestlers want to come on my podcast. And like, she's clearly not like a wrestling fan, but her producer, co-host, like does like wrestling. And he was at one of the recent AEW shows. And I think that's how he became friendly with Bowens. And that's how he got on the show and everything. But she's really fun. She doesn't like ask a ton of wrestling questions, but she has some, and then it leads into more stories and stuff. But she also just gets like life questions and life stories. She plays like games with the guests and everything. She has like little segments of like quick hitters, like, hey, trash this person. Like, what made you upset today? Just fucking bury this person. And Bowens buried like an old coach of his that said he'd never make it, or said some shit, or wouldn't book him, or whatever it was. But it's a really fun podcast. So if you've not listened to Allison Rosen is Your New Best Friend, if you listen to it, she might be your new best friend after you listen to it, because I think she's really good. And if I had more time and I didn't spend all of my time listening to wrestling podcasts, I'd probably just listen to her show no matter who her guest was, because I think she's a really good host a really good interviewer, and it's a really fun podcast. So I'm more putting over Allison Rosen here than the Bowen story, which is a good story. He talked about the chants and the "That's right" chant, which is supposed to be like the new "What" chant. He said he was trying to get over. That's a different article. But this article with the Scissor Me Daddy Ass, he didn't ask for permission, and he talks about how he's trying to get it on a T-shirt, and there was some pushback from the Warner Brothers company about like putting that on a shirt and everything. They finally got it through. So it's a good story, but this is more of just everyone go listen to Allison Rosen as your new best friend.
Some of my favorite content is, and it's not even wrestling related, but we'll bring it to wrestling for a second. My favorite content is when a wrestler is on a podcast with someone who maybe the producer is a fan, and so they do the homework, but then you have the host who's also kind of curious about what it's like to be in that entertainment field. So they'll ask like weird out of the park questions, and that's kind of how you get to stuff like this and that's right, these quotable and headlineable moments. And if it doesn't come from like that kind of conversation, then it comes from like someone who's kind of more hardcore, right? Who's someone who knows a little bit about everything about a person's career. So I like Allison Rosen, and I like this particular podcast. It was a lot of fun to listen to and kind of get my head around. So I don't know if you agree with that, where some of the better stuff comes from people who aren't like necessarily super duper hardcore, but have some interest in that.
I think sometimes it can. Sometimes those podcast interviews are very generic and cliche. And when you listen to as much as I do, and you've heard as many of these stories, I can only listen to someone tell their "this is how I got signed" story, "this is how I got started in wrestling" story so many times. Like it's not fun for me. But I understand for that audience who has maybe never heard of this pro wrestler, that's a new story to them, so they have to tell it. But when you have, I think Allison Rosen is like a nice mix, because she's a new fan who has a relationship with wrestlers and seems to have a good friendship with RJ City and stuff. But she's again just like very engaging and stuff. She does the bit during this podcast is like Anthony Bowens tells like, yeah, we're trying to get "That's right" over. And like throughout the podcast, like Bowens will say something and she'll just be like, "That's right." And Bowens like, yeah, bring it back. And like, they're just having fun. And I think that's when you get the actual like good content out of an interview, is when you can tell the host is just having fun. And it's not just like, tell me about your origin story and tell me about this thing type of thing, because then the wrestler is just going to, give the memorized answer of what they've always said because they've been asked this question a million times. When you can tell the host is like listening and engaging and trying to banter and play about, then you get the better content. So I think there's a balance there. And I think not everyone can find that balance, but I think Allison Rosen has done an amazing job with that.
And to piggyback off of that, there really does need to be a chemistry involved, because sometimes that interview that you have, you're an excellent interviewer and you have great questions, but that person is having a day or you're not on it today, like whatever it is, it really does come down to that moment. It does come down to the chemistry that you have with your guests. So I get it. I mean, in my limited experience doing interviews with professional wrestlers, some of them I get along really comfortably with, and therefore the questions and the conversations I had were very free flowing. Other times, not so much. It's just the way of the conversation. That's the way it goes.
Yeah.
Let's move on to number 4. We're talking about Athena. So the girls can hit just as hard as the guys. If I were a man, there would be no backlash. Athena was talking about a whole lot of women's wrestling and her style and certain things that have come up in the news lately. She's on Busted Open Radio and had quite a lot to say. And before we started this show today, I asked you, do you think that this was a kayfabe approach or is she being serious? And I think we kind of realized we're somewhere in the middle. So talk to me about Athena on Busted Open.
Well, Busted Open, and we've talked about the show a lot, but like it can, depending on who is there and who's asking the questions. And I think LaGreca leans more towards like, hey, let's talk kind of like sort of kayfabe-ish type stuff, because like his question is like, hey, why'd you like shift your style? Like, why have we seen this more aggressive side out of you? And that's more of just a kayfabe question of like, why are you doing this, instead of, because the whole backlash on this, it was Jody Threat was like the first match, right? So that was the first match that she started taking liberties with opponents and everything. And it blew up and it became this big thing. Like, typically the question, this is the first time as far as I know that like Athena like really addressed everything. So typically the question might have been like, hey, what happened in this match? And like, were you doing this? Like, what did you think of the reaction? Instead, it was just like, why's your style shift? And Athena's initial answer is just like, well, I felt like it. Nice guys finish last. Like sometimes you get frustrated and you're lost in the shuffle. And like, I think some of that is just very like kayfabe, just sort of stuff of like, oh, okay, like, sure. I guess that's why you did it. But then she does talk about like the differences between men and women and how everybody thinks that the women should be safe and things like that. And this is not like a new topic that Athena has approached. She discussed this when she left WWE, when she said like, oh, I want to do this in the ladder match. And they're like, well, the girls, we got to be safe with them. We don't want them taking these bumps and everything. And she recapped her history on the independent scene, how she would always be like this more aggressive, more hard hitting kind of person. And, she says like the men are out here, Bryan Danielson and Dax Harwood chop the shit out of each other, throw these really hard strikes, and everything. And, people are like, this is the best match ever. Like, yeah, they're really laying it in. And then the women do it. And it's like, wait a second. Why are we doing this? No, it shouldn't be like this. And like, she's not wrong when it comes to that. Like when I saw, I don't know your reaction, you were at this show, right? This is
I was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was there.
So I don't know what your reaction was to it, but when the clips came viral and everything, everyone was like, she's taking liberty, she's shooting on her opponent, like she's unsafe and everything. And I saw it and I'm just like, looks like she's just kind of, working a little bit tougher than maybe we're used to out of her, but it didn't look any different than, again, what like a Steiner brother would do, or what we've seen on Dark before between some of the higher level guys and the enhancement guys out there. It's just like, but because it's women, we have to cause a fit about it.
So I'll give you my perspective before and after the match. So, or during the match, I should say. When I watched it live in the crowd in Toronto, first of all, the crowd was like ecstatic because Jody Threat is very, very popular here and just an excellent wrestler. I know Sean has put her over time and again, and rightfully so. So people were just excited for that. Athena, of course, has her own pedigree as a very solid wrestler, period, end of sentence. It got a little heated during the match, but we just kind of chalked that up to like Jody Threat is that kind of wrestler. She's a ball of fire and energy, and she goes hard and like she's reckless. That's her style. I've never seen her get hurt because of it, and I don't think most people in the crowd had seen her get hurt because of it. So we just really enjoyed the match for what it was. And then after the fact, we saw on social media, people started posting clips from the filmed and edited version on Dark, and to me, it really felt like it was just bad faith acting from whoever was getting upset over it. And most people would say, if you don't know Jody Threat, well, here's a few matches you should probably check out before you cast judgment on Athena for working a style that is much more comfortable for someone like Jody. And if anyone's going to be able to match the style of somebody else, it's someone like Athena, who is much more of a ring general. So for me, I just kind of said, this is much ado about nothing. This is just people getting upset over nothing. And what it turned into ended up being the best possible situation for Athena, because storyline wise, I know we don't talk about it here and that's not really what we're after, but she was kind of floundering in the women's division. And now this is an opportunity for her to have a new attitude, a new perspective, and to wrestle a different style that much more complements what she's trying to get attention for. This is good. What she's talking about here, this is good. It's true, it's honest. There's frustration and there's reality, but it's also blurring the lines in a certain way that, for me, works and makes me more invested in Athena as a wrestler, as a person, as a character. So I quite enjoyed the conversation. I like it when the lines are blurred in a positive way that influences the story more than the person.
Yeah. Yeah, and I thought Athena, I've always enjoyed Athena interviews because she is very honest about stuff. She's not someone who is typically just like going to hold back and not say something because she's worried about it getting her in trouble. There's I know I've talked about this before. There's the famous. She just went on Twitch and like reviewed. This is when she's part of WWE. Just like reviewed Raw one week. It's like, yeah, I didn't really like that. I didn't really understand that, and that clip got pulled very quickly. But like she just doesn't really care, and I love that about her. So and this is again, as far as I know, her talking about this on Busted Open was like the first time she'd really gotten a chance to talk about all of this since it happened, and this was like 2 months ago. I feel like so it's been a while since it happened, but she just hasn't done any interviews to really address it.
Congratulations to new Ring of Honor Women's Champion Athena.
True.
I guess we'll find out. Well, maybe by the time you've watched this and left a thumbs up.
No, she won. Joel, she already won.
You're right. She already won. You're right. My bad.
Yeah.
Let's move on. Number 3. JBL says he recommended to Vince McMahon that Fit Finlay be hired in the mid-90s. Fit Finlay on his podcast that he does with Gerald Briscoe.
JBL's podcast with Gerald Briscoe, not Fit.
Yeah, JBL does the podcast with Briscoe. Did I say Fit Finlay does the podcast?
Yes.
My mistake. Yeah, JBL does a podcast with Briscoe called Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw. So clearly we know who hosts the show. He's talking about his first hiring is Justin Bradshaw. Justin
Hawk Bradshaw.
That's why nobody kept the name. That's an awful name. It just tears you up inside. Talking about getting
JHB, baby.
Yeah, GHB. That's right. Anyway, talking about whether Fit Finlay would have gotten hired over Jerry Bradshaw. Talk about the show because I got nothing. My tongue's tied. It's tied in knots, man. It's over. I can't watch these guys talk anymore.
So this podcast one is very long. This particular one is 2 hours, but most of their podcasts are legitimately like 2 hours. And William Regal was actually the guest on this particular podcast, and it came out on Thursday. So, I'm listening to this and I'm familiar enough with their show to know like Regal ain't really going to say anything. And this could have been taped weeks ago for all I know, but I'm also familiar enough with their podcast to know like, this is not a, let's get a juicy news headline, what's the latest happening type of podcast. It is Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw, two guys. Like I think Briscoe's in like his 70s. JBL's got to be in his 50s. Like, these are two old school guys who are just sitting back, drinking beer, smoking whatever, and they're just having these guests on to talk about like they're coming up through the business and just stories. Like it's really not even like, they don't even like ask questions. They're just like, just tell a story. And then they start talking, and then Briscoe will tell a story of his, and then Bradshaw will kind of like tell a related story. And they'll just keep telling. It's not even like an interview thing. It's legitimately just imagine three people sitting around reminiscing about the old times. And like, if that's what you're into, cool. Like there's some really fun stories in these interviews. I listened because I was curious to see if like, hey, is Regal going to say anything? No. Regal covers basically his entire career up until the 90s. And then JBL, they talk about Finlay. And of course, Regal and Finlay have their big history together. And Regal is putting over Finlay. And then JBL tells the story of like, yeah, when I got hired in the mid 90s, like I go into Vince's office. Is like, is there anybody in Europe that I should hire? JBL's like, Finlay. And JBL and Finlay worked together in Europe for during the early 90s and stuff that I learned. And Vince is like, well, would you hire him over you? And JBL's like, yeah, I probably would. People love Fit Finlay. Like, I knew he was respected, but he is. Good. I knew he was like respected and everything, but people really love Fit Finlay. And then I just started imagining like, what the fuck would Fit Finlay look like in mid 90s WWF? And I don't think it'd be very good.
Think of Hornswoggle with Finlay, but instead of Hornswoggle, it's Fit Finlay doing Hornswoggle.
That sounds about right. Yeah, that sounds about right.
You get the whole Irish experience with that man.
He'd have his pot of gold coming out there and shit. Like his finisher would be called the Lucky Charm or something. It would.
Oh my god! Something. Perfect.
Yeah, it would be something. It would.
He'd have the shillelagh, but he wouldn't use the shillelagh.
But I thought it was just an interesting little thing. I know JBL has praised Fit Finlay before. just calling him, talking about like just like what a great worker he was and everything. I did not know that he had legitimately recommended Finley be hired in the mid 90s. Obviously it didn't happen. Finley went to WCW and everything, but one, I'd never heard this story before. Two, we haven't talked about Briscoe stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw. So I wanted to kind of highlight their podcast a little bit, let everybody know that it's out there. And if you are an older wrestling fan, I think you'd probably enjoy this. Like if you just like listening to stories about like old wrestling and territory days and like coming up through the business and stuff like back in my day, you'd probably really like this podcast. I don't know how much of our viewership falls in that demo, but if you do, go check it out. It's a long listen, and it can get a little, Briscoe is older and he can get a little monotone and everything, but JBL is very good. JBL is very engaging, and the guests are typically very good as well.
For those who don't know, Jables also had a WWE Network show for a short amount of time where he would interview wrestlers. And that was really well received, and it was a lot of fun. I think it was just called Conversations with JBL, but go and find that. I think it ran for about a season or two on WWE Network. Doubt it's on Peacock, so you have to go and go find the OG network like I do. But if you can, it's very engaging stuff if you like talking about a little bit old school wrestling with JBL, who himself is a historian and has experienced a lot of that stuff. I like that. So let's move on. Number 2, Dustin Rhodes says, I don't want to embarrass myself. I want to get out while I can still walk. Another busted open appearance, this time with Dustin Rhodes, talking about seeing Ray Candy when he was walking to the ring with a walker and felt like that was past his prime and past his time, and he didn't want to be like Ray Candy. Dustin wants to go out while he can still walk. What do you think of this interview? Talk to me about it.
So Dustin made headlines over the weekend when just at a Blizzard Brawl taping, he's like, 2023 is going to be my last year as like an in-ring performer. Like I'm kind of done. And then he even said in this interview, is like, I didn't think it would blow up all that much. It's like, really? And LaGreca like kind of just pointed out to him, was like, really, you didn't think this was going to be a big deal? Like you're Dustin Rhodes. And Dustin admitted, I didn't cover this in the article, but I'll mention it now. Dustin admitted, like, yeah, I don't think of myself as like being on that level that people are going to care and everything. And LaGreca's like, well, you should. And Dustin's like, well, maybe I should. So yeah, Dustin didn't think this was going to be a thing. It obviously was a thing because Dustin has been in the game for 3 decades now. He's had a legendary career as multiple like personalities and stuff. He's proven that he can get over like just a regular old character, and he's proven he can get over just gold dust. I mean, just an out there kind of character. And now he's in the twilight of his career and the end of his run here, and he's doing coaching and helping out. He's still a bust out of a fucking Canadian Destroyer on Wednesday. So he's doing that kind of stuff. As far as like his comments about everything, I thought they were interesting because I get where he's coming from. You see a lot of the older people who just keep wrestling, and some of them can go, and it's fine. Dustin was very much of like, I want to still be able to walk. Like I don't want to have to do all of this stuff. I don't know if Dustin enjoys doing Canadian Destroyers. I feel they're very out of place with him. Like when I saw it, he's done them before, but like when I saw it on Wednesday, I was like, man, why is like Dustin Rhodes just busting out Canadian Destroyers? Like, does he really need to do this stuff? And I don't feel like he does, but I think he does it because he wants to like prove he can do this stuff and hang with the young guys and everything. I just like that he gave more color on why he's deciding to walk away. He also revealed that his AW contract is up in July. I'm sure that'll lead to some talk and some speculation and everything that he might go back to WWE and have one more match because he's going to end at 2023. Cody Rhodes is going to push for this one. He's going to bring him in, let us do a pay-per-view, let us work one last match in WWE. This will be Dustin's final match. And that's how you build it. And it could happen.
Dustin just wants to coach his brother one last time, but he can't be on screen with it. He can't be on screen with his brother for 12 months. This is interesting. Dustin says it'll be 35 years in the business, almost 36, and that's a good round number. I'm sorry. Why is 30 the round number?
35 is a round number, right? It's intervals of 5.
Yeah. Make it to 40. I don't know. Make it to 40 by doing 1 or 2 matches a year. He's already coaching for AEW.
Well,
like it's not like he doesn't keep himself in shape, is what I'm saying.
And he said that, like, even though 2023 might be like his last year, it does seem like he's open to the possibility of, like, yeah, if they just need me to do a match here and there in upcoming years, like, I'll do it type of thing. It was mainly what he's saying is, like, you know, I can't do this thing of, like, I'm wrestling once every 2 months because that just wrecks my body and everything. Like, I either got to, like, be active or I got to not be active. So it sounds like he wants to be relatively active in 2023. And then after that, it's all right. If you need me for 1 match a year, I can probably give you 1 match a year.
That makes sense. And I remember DDP also saying he doesn't want to do 1 match a year because that also wrecks his body. It's up to the performer. We know what they're comfortable with and how they feel. Regardless, a storied career, like we talked about at the top of this article. He's been through everything and done everything. And maybe there is a possibility that, you know, after the summer, he winds up in WWE one last time. Or maybe Tony Khan makes overtures and gets himself a Rhodes under contract after his contract expires. Who knows? Let's move on to number 1. Colt Cabana's back. Colt Cabana explains how bad apples are dealt with in wrestling locker rooms. Oh dear. Well, he's not on his Art of Wrestling podcast, but check it out. Instead, he's appearing on the Work of Wrestling podcast, and he's asked about bad apples in the locker room. Buddy, the irony is not lost on me. I love that we're talking about it. How do we deal with bad apples in the locker room, Jeremy Lambert?
So I'm going to talk a lot before I actually get to the question. I apologize as I Tony Khan your question here. I've never heard of the Work of Wrestling podcast, but the person is a wrestling fan. I apologize that I don't have his name off the top. I should include that in the article.
Tim Kale.
Okay, there you go. So I never heard of it. He's a wrestling fan. He said he like looks up to Cabana because Cabana like has done the Art of Wrestling podcast, and like that's what kind of got him into podcasting. And he always wanted Cabana as like a guest and everything. So he was very clearly a fan of Cabana, knew of his career and everything, knew the stories and everything. And Cabana has done interviews and he has his own podcast since everything has sort of happened. On his own podcast, he can talk about what he wants, right? Like he doesn't have to address anything. That's his own free-flowing type of thing. He was on the Pro Wrestling Tees podcast. Yeah, he has a great relationship with them. He can, he can kind of maneuver his way through that of like, hey, let's not talk about this type of thing. This guy, I don't know if there was any directive beforehand of like, we're not going to talk about this type of thing. What I liked is that he obviously didn't directly mention like, hey, what's up with All Out, CM Punk? Like, what do you think of this stuff? And I don't know if this was purposeful or not, but the fact that he asked this question makes me feel like there was intent behind the question about like Bad Apple, because throughout the interview, he asked another question about like press conferences and like blurring those lines and stuff. So it feels like he was very much just trying to, in a roundabout way, ask about everything. And Cabana navigated it well, but I appreciated his attempt here at going after what kind of everybody wants to talk about. So he asked about bad apples, and Cabana gives the answer of like, yeah, usually like you kind of just got to group together and almost give them an ultimatum, and they either change or they don't. And that's what happens. And Cabana even immediately off the top says, thinking about situations, not even talking about currently, but like ROH locker room and other locker rooms I've been in, like this is how it kind of happened. It's like, yeah, okay, we get it. We get it. But I thought it was a good question. I thought it was a good way to ask a question that was on kind of everybody's mind without having to directly ask the question on everybody's mind. And I thought Cabana's answer, you can make of that what you will.
So reading a little bit about this podcast, I admittedly have not heard Tim's podcast, The Work of Wrestling, but judging from the descriptions I'm reading, he takes an approach of the art in wrestling.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. He takes an artistic approach and not a news approach. So for him to ask certain questions like this, he's not trying to get to the bottom of what's happened with CM Punk and Colt Cabana. He's not trying to get to the bottom of why the Young Bucks were suspended, all that stuff. He's trying to get to the bottom of like locker room culture, regardless of where you are and what time you are. It seems like that's as far back as he wants to pull the curtain on his own podcast, which he is totally welcome to do. The rest of the time, it looks like everything else is like, what were the stories that were important this week in wrestling? Like, what were the stories on air that were told, that we're talking about, that we're really diving into? And that's why, like you said, that's why he kind of gets away with it, is because he's not investigative journalist Tim Cale. He is artist discusser Tim Cale. That's good.
And that's very true. Like, he mentions that in his podcast and everything, and you can tell by his line of questioning that he's definitely not looking to make like headlines and stuff. Again, this is on me. I've not listened to the podcast to do like a bunch of research and everything, but like, I don't know if he's asked this question to other guests or if this was almost just let me ask this to Colt because of everything. So you're right in that, like, it fit with the overall theme of his podcast, but it fit with a relevant news topic. And would he have asked this question if he was interviewing, let's say, Keith Lee? Like, is he asking about bad apples in the locker room? I don't know, because he does ask a question later on of like, why isn't there more Colt Cabana on TV? Like, I want to see more Colt Cabana on my TV, and Cabana talks about that a little bit as well. So, and that's where he mentions like the AEW deal where Jericho had requested him, and Jericho talks about that on his podcast today, Friday, for those Friday for context. He talked about that on his podcast, like getting Colt back and everything. So Colt's in the news a little bit with doing podcast rounds, and Jericho on his own podcast recapping his 2022 and everything. But I thought it was a interesting question, whether he was attempting to get this type of information or not, whether it fit with the narrative of his podcast, however the question came about, and then Colt's answer, however you want to make of that.
How would you, Jeremy Lambert, deal with bad apples in your locker room?
I'd eat a muffin, and I'd say, I'm old, I'm hurt, I'm fucking tired, and I work with empty-headed dumb fuck children who couldn't manage a target. I think that's the proper way to deal with your coworkers who are annoying you.
Target didn't really survive here in Canada, so
because it was managed by a bunch of young bucks, apparently.
Apparently, no one was ready for it. So yeah. I guess we got to get out of here. I guess it's time. Go enjoy your weekends. Jeremy, what would you like to plug? I know where we're going with this. Let's go.
Don't follow me on Twitter. Hive has apparently died, and so I would like to
buddy. It never started.
Well, I would like to state that I never went over there, and so I was first. Follow Steven Jensen. Follow Steven Jensen on Twitter at @FightTalk_. Go to Fightful Overbooked. We have new content every single day. Go subscribe to the channel. I mean, you're on the channel right now. Leave a thumbs up on this video and other videos. Mighty Ducks Game Changers. You can watch Steven Jensen and SB3 review season 2. That is up on the channel now. Tim and Joel have a new episode on Sunday. Tag Talk will be back this week. Coexisting is up. New content every day. There was a New Japan episode this week as well.
Hell yeah, Bread Club.
Yeah. The Gauntlet with the GOAT, Andrew Thompson, talking about Kofi Kingston's title run. So yes, a lot of content that you can consume on Fightful Overbooked, and we got ideas for the end of the year as well.
By the way, congratulations to Rob and Maggie. This is their 1-year anniversary show. Just happened this week, so we'll send them congratulations here. They are great.
Shout out to Robert Wilkins, who is always just trying to do stuff, and I appreciate his ambition and his willingness to help, even though like he's not part of the news team on Fightful. Technically, he's always looking to help with the writing and take on projects and everything. Rob Wilkins is a fantastic human being, and everyone should go. If you want to follow him on Twitter, you can do that. But go watch Coexisting and support that show.
Yeah, absolutely. Congratulations on a year. Wanted to shout them out because it's hard. Content creation is not an easy gig. A lot of people think that it can be that way, but it takes a lot of hard work, a lot of dedication. So I want to wish them congratulations and keep it up because it's great stuff. I am Joel Pearl, JOEL, PEARL. Go subscribe to us here at Fightful Overbooked, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.